Okay, today we start chapter 5 of Sitting Pretty. And the title of this chapter is called The Price of Your Body. So we're going to read just the first section today. Here we go. Tim Tausig, who's her dad, got his first job as a bank teller when he was 21 years old. He just married my mom a few weeks before, and with his early earnings, he purchased a trailer that spanned 8 feet by 34 feet, counting the hitch. He worked as an employee of this bank for the next 43 years and 8 months. Every single morning I lived with him, from my infancy to adulthood, my dad rose at 4:30 in the morning. He threw on his clothes, sometimes in his sleep, and took a prayer walk through our neighborhood, regardless of snow, rain, or whether or not his babies had been up all night. He came home, took a shower, ate a disgustingly healthy breakfast, combed his hair to the side, put on his suit, and was on his way to the bus that would take him to work by 6:13, a bus he never missed once. He worked in his office all day, 5 days a week. No heading in late to work or taking an early afternoon off. I think the man took half a sick day in his entire career, and then only when his body was protesting with a high fever and hacking lungs. My mom was sure he was dying. Why else could he be staying home? He returned each night at 6:17 in time for dinner with his wife and 6 kids. His unflagging routine felt more constant than the trees growing in our yard or the beams holding up our house. I watched all this carefully and with growing awe. When I was little, I would wait for him in the front yard, practicing dance routines with my walker as the minutes ticked closer to his return home. As I got older, I'd stir when I heard him leaving the house. I could see the pitch black night through my curtains. I'd turn over in my bed, and as I fell back to sleep, I wondered how he managed to operate in a world where nighttime is your morning. I never wanted him to know how late I'd slept in on a Saturday. When I bumped into him into the kitchen, his t-shirt sweaty from just having mowed the lawn or his arms full of grocery bags, I'd pretend I'd been up for hours. I had only stayed in bed because I was reading. No decent people could sleep away that much of the day. While my dad continued his rigid, unwavering routine, I started to miss more and more school. When my CD alarm clock started to blare the A Walk to Remember soundtrack at 7 in the morning, I was exhausted and anxious. Lifting my head felt like swimming across a freezing lake. At least once a week, there was a day when I wasn't sure I could manage to get dressed, let alone sit through 7 classes. I started to fall behind in school, and the more behind I got, the more I fantasized about living in a cave. I'd pull my comforter over my head and pretended I lived in deep, dark solitude. I didn't see a clear or easy reason for these patterns. I didn't have the flu or strep throat or cancer. I just felt ill-equipped for the task at hand. In the second month of my freshman year of high school, my school counselor called me into her office because I'd been missing so many days of school. "So what's going on?" she asked. I don't remember her tone, but I know I received it as accusatory. Before she'd finished her question, hot tears were spilling down my cheeks faster than I could wipe them up. I don't, I, the words caught in my chest. I struggled to push them out of my mouth to take a deep breath. I could hear myself gasping, hear her telling me to breathe, just breathe. She sounded far away, like she was mumbling to me from the next room. My own voice was so much louder, it sounded frantic and high-pitched, but my rational mind couldn't figure out why. "Stop it. Get in line. Just calm down and do the things." I felt furious with myself for failing to keep up, to manage the basic tasks all my peers seemed to be able to handle. I don't remember any of the words I managed to get out, but the counselor talked with my parents, and together they decided I should drop 2 of my classes and finish out high school with an adapted schedule. I was so relieved and so ashamed. Now, in all of my retrospective wisdom, I can dissect my poor attendance to its tiniest particles. Some of my sick days were tied up with the unique pains of my body. At least once a month, my back and side would surge with raging nerve pain that flared every time I spoke or took a deep breath, let alone moved my whole body. Some of it was surely wrapped up in anxiety and depression. I felt like a glaring typo on the text of my high school, a clear outsider, the thing that did not belong. I'm certain there were others who felt this way too. I just don't know how to see them yet. And of course, navigating through a world that doesn't operate with a disabled body and mind is simply exhausting. I didn't understand the web of factors pushing me back into bed day after day. Instead, I just felt like a giant, incompetent failure. As I got older, I couldn't fathom how I would grow up to work a full-time adult job. How would a girl who could barely get through a week of high school even approximate Tim Tausig working adult schedule? The constant between our days was stark and embarrassing. But there were other logistical barriers that made it difficult to picture too. Like every year on Take Your Daughter to Work Day, I tried to ride the public bus with my dad, and every year my disabled body seemed to be single-handedly shut down the entire transportation system. The bus drivers never knew how to work the lifts or attach the extra strap to lock my wheels to the bus floor. As the years went by, my peers were getting jobs as waitresses and baristas, landscapers, and grocery store cashiers, but I couldn't picture myself fitting into any of these jobs. How could I deliver plates of food to tables or operate espresso machines that rested on countertops I couldn't reach? And if I couldn't get a job, could I even be an adult? Even at a very young age, I found it difficult to picture myself in the future. I couldn't imagine life beyond being my parents' kid with any clarity or practicality. When I was 8 or 9, I started somberly reporting to my parents that I would not live past the age of 14. With a cruel and creepy thing for a kid to say to her parents, right? Sorry, M and D, mom and dad. But I didn't mean it to be ominous. Honestly, I think it came from an earnest inability to see into my adulthood. My future was a blinding white blank slate. How would I ever navigate the hoops laid out before me? How would I pay the steep bill attached to living in this body of mine? 2 summers before I graduated from high school, my long-term best friend, Bertie, and I volunteered with our church to work at a summer camp located a few hours outside of the city. Like most camps, it wasn't accessible. This didn't surprise or even upset me. It was totally what I expected, what I always expected from the built spaces around me. Plus, Bertie and I were experts at maneuvering the inaccessible. We'd been friends since the early awkward days of 7th grade band, sitting side by side, playing flute, catching each other's eyes and giggling whenever our ragey director threw another fit. She knew how to tilt my chair to the side whenever I needed to pop my wheel back into place. Didn't hesitate to bump me down a flight of stairs whenever they appeared in our path, and didn't get frazzled by a big grassy hill. We always found our own weird way, and I remained relentlessly optimistic that we could make anything work. I applied for the camp counselor position with the caveat that Bertie would do it with me. Together, we would plow through it all, like we did through craft fairs and theme parks and high school hallways. Within a few weeks, the camp declined my application. Administrators explained in a few words I wouldn't be able to fulfill the duties of a counselor or even an assistant counselor on their grassy, hilly, covered in stairs campgrounds. I was devastated, and I pretended I didn't care at all. I was totally chill, easy breezy, whatever, babe. Bertie suggested we reapply for positions in the kitchen, and after a bit, the camp came back with a different answer. Bertie and I could be assistant cooks in the smallest camp kitchen. After the sting of the initial rejection subsided, we were both thrilled. We were just as efficient as at washing dishes as any typical high school camp staffer, so not tremendously efficient. We invented games to make washing hundreds of dishes into a good time and listened to the Reliant K and Audio Adrenaline as we plopped canned fruit onto serving dishes. In the afternoon, we ran around with the kids on the rickety playground equipment and played cards in our little cabin. Bliss. One afternoon, as Bertie pushed me back to our cabin for an hour of playing hearts and chomping on Pringles, she whispered behind my ear, I saw something I wasn't supposed to. I begged her to tell me what it was, but she wouldn't until the door was closed tightly behind us. Have you noticed that we have like 100% more free time than anyone else working here? My mind filled with memories of the past few days. We were in the kitchen a few hours a day. The rest of the time we wandered around camp, took naps, and painted each other's nails. Yep, I laughed. Well, I saw a sheet of paper that listed the positions of every single staffer at camp, she said. Her eyes were wide, but I couldn't tell whether she was amused or angry. Maybe both. And next to each person's name, there was a little 1, like the position was filled with one person. Next to our names, they put zeros. In other words, as we reasoned, the camp seemed to have invented these positions for us in order to give us something to do, to make us feel included. And by us, I mean me. Of course, Bertie could have had a real staff position if she weren't busy helping me over the bumpy playgrounds and up the steps of our cabin. Bertie kept talking, and I think I even giggled. But inside, all I could hear was this: the work you're doing at this camp, your presence here, is comprehensively, quantifiably, undeniably worthless. Not only was I a zero, but I'd made Bertie a zero as well. I was a burden, taking up so much of Bertie's energies that I robbed her of any worthwhile contribution she could have made. Well, at least we know we never have to come back, I said, trying to stay light and bright. I'd really believed I was contributing something to the camp, holding out my open hands with something of value to offer. But somehow this contribution didn't fit into the camp system of tasks and work. Every hour I'd spent spraying down the dirty plates, singing loudly over the dishwasher, opening cans of peaches, giggling with the kids on the playground. Every moment that had meant something to me, every memory that was still plump and soft with that sweet camp glow, felt sucked of meaning, like a jelly donut scraped into a hollow, bland pastry carcass. My efforts didn't count, literally. The dismissal made me pull back and clench my hands into tight fists. As I neared my graduation from high school, I hovered on the edge of what felt like an endless canyon. I couldn't picture how I would survive this endless stretch of landscape, let alone where I fit in. I knew there were paths that could get you safely from one side to the other. Go to college, pick a major that will land you a job, pay your bills, save some money, and retire into the sunset. But no matter how chipper and positive I tried to be, I started to see more and more signs that my body would not glide easily through these mile markers. Each step and turn brought complications. Each milestone came with costs, and one fee waiting for me in adulthood would arrive at my 23rd birthday. As my dad reminded me with increasing urgency, I would be ejected from his health insurance coverage when I turned 23. Happy birthday! I expected this rite of passage is distinctly American. In 2010, the cutoff was extended to one's 26th birthday. Every once in a while, I find myself playing the impossible what if game, imagining what choices I would have made, what dreams I could have chased, and had I grown up in a country where the fear of not having health insurance didn't haunt the background of the possibilities I allowed myself to imagine. Would I have taken more risks, followed my gut, dodged some bullets, breathed more easily if the constant fear of paying for my body were put to the side? I'd known of these looming 23rd birthday deadline since I was a young girl. Year after year, my chest tightened just a little bit more. I knew I was expensive. For as long as I could remember, I'd been racking up medical bills for my parents with a never ending string of treatments, visits to specialists, prescription medications, and regular testing. I was also very aware that we didn't have money to spare. We drove our janky, sputtering cars to the ground, wore only hand me downs and secondhand clothes, vacationed at my grandmother's 3-bedroom ranch in Lawrence, Kansas, and splurged by sharing an extra large pizza at Godfather's on our birthdays. I saw my dad going out on his way to save 17 cents on milk, even as I sat in a wheelchair that cost more than his car. The older I got, the more I cringed at the bills my body created. It took me a little bit longer to realize just how lucky we were. The only reason my parents were able to pay for my body at all was because of the health insurance policy my dad received through his full-time job at the big bank downtown. Many people do not have this kind of coverage or stability. So that's where we're going to leave off, but they'll talk a little more about healthcare and the price of her body. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. These are hard topics, but I think it's really important to talk about how having a disability affects someone's view of the world and their own identity. And so as high schoolers and you're starting to identify your own identity, we want to know that you are a valued member of society and we love you, and that it's important to learn more and hear everyone's story. And then you start to understand more. Thanks for listening.